John chapter 6. So in John chapter 6, we're probably not going to make it all the way through the chapter. I'm pretty sure we won't. But here in chapter 6, we come upon an account that is recorded in all four Gospels. This is one of the miracles that's recorded in all four Gospels, the feeding of the 5,000. And in chapter 5, we saw Jesus returning from Galilee to Jerusalem to celebrate one of the feasts. And here in chapter 6, we see Jesus back in Galilee around the time, just before the time of the Passover. So he's back in Galilee, and they're probably just getting ready to start making their way back. And so we've jumped some time ahead, and Jesus is now in the Galilee again, reaching and teaching the people. So let's start off here, verse 1. It says, "After these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. Then a great multitude followed him, because they saw his signs which he performed on those who were diseased. And Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. Now the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was near." So Matthew, Mark, and Luke's Gospels give us a little bit more detail of what was happening that brought them to this place. Now, Jesus had sent out the disciples 2 by 2 to go and do ministry, to preach the gospel, to heal the sick, to cast out demons. And they had gone all out and they were going around doing ministry, and they had just come back. They had just come back to Jesus, so they're excited. They're like, yes, and telling Jesus all the things that have taken place, but they're also tired. They're tired and hungry. They're just exhausted. And so Jesus says, okay, we need to go to a nice quiet place. So they jump in the boats, they head across the Galilee, and they go into the wilderness region to get away for a bit. They're going to take a rest, to take a break, which is always good when you're tired. And so they're excited, they're excited, they're passionate about what's just happened, but they're also tired and hungry. Also, at the same time, Jesus has just found out that John the Baptist has lost his head, that he has been beheaded. And so he's mourning over that. So he says, guys, with all that's going on, let's just go take a little rest. Let's go take a little break. So they head into the wilderness, but of course, the multitudes follow. Someone sees him, they get wind, and they start following. And you would think that they wouldn't follow him way off into the wilderness, far away from everything else, but they followed him just the same. And they went to this quiet place. And Mark's Gospel tells us, it says in verse 6, or chapter 6 of Mark's Gospel, verse 34, it says, "And Jesus, when he came out, saw a great multitude and was moved with compassion for them, because they were like sheep not having a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things." So, worn out and tired, trying to get away, they get into the wilderness, and this multitude comes, and Jesus looks at them with compassion. And he says, just like a sheep without shepherd. And so he goes and he begins to teach them. In John chapter 6, verse 5, it says, "Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing the multitude coming towards him, he said to Philip, 'Where shall we buy bread that these may eat?' But this he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little." The other Gospels tell us that Jesus taught the people and that he was healing the sick, and he was doing this all day long. And at the end of the day, he turned to Philip and he said, "We need to get these guys some food." The disciples said, "We need to send them away. We need to get rid of they need to go. They got to go now because it's getting dark. They're not going to make it home, to get food." And Jesus asked this question of Philip. He says, "Hey, we need to go get some food for these guys." And Philip here his answer here is logical. Even if we had 200 denarii, which is about 6 months' wages, we couldn't feed them. And if we did, it would just be a little bit for each person. Plus the fact that you can imagine Philip's mind. He says, even if we had 600 denarii, which we don't, but also, where are you going to find 600 denarii worth of food? Like, what bakery is open this late hour? And you guys know what it's like if you head to a bakery late in the afternoon. Especially in the summer sometimes, right? You think, oh, we'll have hot dogs. And you go to Superstore and all the shelves are cleared out. And you're like, well, I guess we're having, bread around my hot dog, or I'm putting the hot dog in a bagel because that's all they got left, right? Sometimes you show up and everything is gone. And so he says, he looks at Jesus and he says, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. And so he's just logically saying, look, we can't feed them all, and we wouldn't be able to get that much bread. And Jesus knew what he was about to do, but he was using this moment as another teaching lesson. We're going to see that all the way through the gospel, that Jesus uses every instance to teach his disciples something. Even when they're in the middle of ministry, he wants to teach them something. And they had just come back from preaching the gospel. They had come back from healing the sick. They had even casted out demons. And these guys were excited. And Jesus is testing their faith, stretching their faith even more. They have just come back from seeing all of these miracles. And Jesus says now, hey guys, let's feed them. And they go, well, that's not possible. We can't. There's too many of them. It's too big. They had gone out 2 by 2 into all these villages, were preaching and teaching and seeing all wonderful things. They come back to Jesus. Jesus says, hey, look at this big crowd, let's feed them. They go, it's not possible. It can't be done. And John also tells us that this happened just before Passover, which means that the crowds were quite large because people would have been heading from the Galilee and probably preparing their trip down to Jerusalem. And so they've got their whole family with them. And they're heading down to Jerusalem. And they also would have had in their mind, as they're preparing for Passover, the story of the Exodus, that the Lord led the people out of Egypt and he took care of them in the wilderness and fed them. And so they already have this thought in their mind, and Jesus goes, this is a great time. This is a great time to teach the disciples a lesson and bless these people who are hungry. And verse 7 says, Jesus answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that everyone would have a little. Like I said, Philip here is crunching the numbers. He's crunching the numbers practically, and he figures out how much it would cost to feed these guys just a little bit each. And he's thinking like many of us do in practical terms. When one of these situations come, we start crunching the numbers. And we try to figure out what's the bare minimum that we can get by with. What do we need just to get by? Because we look at the situation as too big. It's impossible for us to do. So what is the minimum amount we can do to get by? But we know, as we're going to see in the story, Jesus isn't thinking that way. He's not thinking, how much do we give them a little bit just to tide them by so they can get, travel a little further and get their food. No, he's thinking, I'm going to take care of them. We often place God in a box, don't we? In our own mind, we think, well, this is too big for him because I can't figure out how it could happen. And that's exactly what Philip's doing. He's looking at going, it's impossible. First of all, we don't have the money. There's no bakery around that's got that much bread laying around. This is just not possible. It can't happen. And we do that so often in our lives where we put God into a box of our own limitations and think God can't come through in this situation. He's not going to be able to help. And it's not that we're doubting the Lord or not trusting in him. We just go, I'm not even going to ask, or I'm not even going to bring it to the Lord because it's impossible. It can't happen. It's not, How many of you guys have thought, well, this issue is just not worth bringing up because it's just not going to happen, right? You're like, it's not even worth praying about. It's just not going to happen. And the Lord says, try me. Because this is one of those situations. Imagine being at the arena at Western Financial Place. It seats, 5,000, right?
Yeah.
So you've got it packed to the rafters. All right? And the concession stands go, we got no food! And someone says, hey, Sandy, could you go down and get some hot dogs from Safeway and bring them out here and we'll feed everybody? Yeah, exactly. No. Good luck. There wouldn't be enough hot dogs in Safeway, in all the grocery stores, to feed 5,000 people in Cranmer. They would say, oh, I'm sorry, sir, that's a special order. And, you got to bring a truckload in. So in our minds, we go, no, it's impossible. And Jesus here is testing his disciples here by throwing this test. And here we're going to see that the Lord is going to give the people their food, but he's going to give them more than you could ever imagine from a very small amount. So one of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many?" So Philip, he crunches the numbers, and Andrew checks around. And maybe there's some bread laying around. Maybe we can find some supplies out there. He checks the inventory. And he says, "We have 5 loaves and 2 fish." And Andrew brings this young boy to Jesus with the 5 barley loaves and the 2 fish. Now, barley loaves were considered poor man's food. Barley was what they used to feed animals. And so it wasn't considered something that you would really want. And so these were small barley loaves and 2 fish. And the fish, most likely according to the language in the Greek, I'm told, are salted fish. They would be small salted fish, and they would be like something you would spread or sprinkle onto your bread and eat.
Sardines.
Yeah, sardines. You put them on there, have a little sandwich, and so they're not huge. It's not like there's these big fish. It's 2 small fish, little fish, and they're salted. And so he's standing there before them with this little amount. And it says, "Then Jesus said, 'Make the people sit down.' Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, in number about 5,000. So we look at the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and see nothing. We got nothing. This is not even worth even looking at. It's like, kid, you might as well take this away. It's not even worth mentioning to Jesus. And Jesus looks at this and he sees a feast. He sees the possibilities because he's the Lord and he knows what he can do with a little. In our eyes, this looks like nothing. But in God's eyes, he sees provision. He sees provision. He sees the provision they've been looking for, that he's been asking for. Jesus knew what he was about to do. He was just looking for his disciples' participation. He was asking them to take part in what's about to happen. And they're completely clueless. They're like, 5 loaves, 2 fish, this isn't going to get us anywhere. He gets them to sit down on the grass, and it's kind of neat because in Mark's gospel it says the green grass. And that makes me think about what he just said in Mark's gospel where he says they're like sheep without a shepherd. So he sits them down on the green grass and goes, "Now I'm going to feed you. Like a shepherd, I'm going to feed the sheep. I'm going to make sure they're taken care of." And so he sits them down. Can you imagine this task? He gets them to sit down. And in the other Gospels it says that they sat in groups of 50s, groups of 100. So they divided them up into different groups. It's 5,000 people. How many of you guys have ever herded a large group of people? It's a crazy task. They don't always listen. People go different directions. It gets a little bit crazy. But 5,000 people, and they don't have megaphones. They don't have amplification. They don't have radios. Hey, Roger Dodger Matthew, you got the 50 over there. Good, got them seated. Okay, they're not. You can just see them going, "Sit down! Groups up that day. Yes, I'm talking to you. Just so come on." Getting them all centered and placed down. But Jesus, he looked at them. He looked at this group with compassion. He looked at them like sheep without a shepherd that need to be fed, need to be taken care of. And he's been feeding them the word. He's been healing and working. And now he's like, "Now I'm going to feed you guys dinner. I'm going to feed you guys dinner. You're going to be fed." And you can imagine the crowd. They still didn't have any idea what's about to happen either. They're looking and going, "Well, I'm getting a little hungry. How long is this guy going to go on for?" And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given them thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish as much as they wanted. I've often wondered what did this look like? You see it in movies and stuff, but how did it look like? He's got the loaves of bread, and he's breaking them and putting them in the basket. Did he just have one loaf, and he's like
a cartoon.
And it's like,
when they're eating and the food never disappears.
Yeah, like cartoon when the food just keeps coming. Yeah, it's like what? What did it look like? Did it just keep kind of? Was it like a magician, And it's like, hey, you know, it's like it just kept coming and kept coming, and he filled the baskets, and 5,000 people. That's a lot of bread, and it says here as much as they wanted. So it's not just, hey, everybody gets a little piece. It's not like communion on Sunday. We get a little piece of a cracker.
I look at it differently. See, Jesus took the loaves of bread, gave thanks, and distributed those. So maybe they're the baskets that they're just kept on being full.
Well, yeah, that's, yeah.
They kept on.
Yeah.
Can you imagine 5,000 people and those baskets, they probably weren't that big.
No.
And walking around.
Yeah.
You sit there and wonder.
Well, the other gospel, the other gospels say he broke the bread, but
did this say that?
Yeah.
Okay,
but anyways, those baskets, yeah, they're never ending because so it's either Jesus was sitting there going this for 15 hours, or he put a little bit in a basket, and then as they were handing out the basket, they kept going. It's bottomless. Yeah, it's the bottomless basket. Have you ever been to a restaurant where they have bottomless fries, but they don't really tell you? And you finish your fries, and they come back and put another basket in front of you, and you're like, whoa. It's like, I didn't order this. This is too much. Yeah. It's like, oh, this is too much. I'm not going to make it. But they just kept coming. It just kept coming and coming and coming. And it was enough for everyone. Enough for everyone to eat. And Matthew's gospel tells us that there was 5,000 men plus women and children. So that right away puts us at like 15,000 approximately. Because you've got, let's say, a woman per man, and then you've got children. Possibly more women were there. And so this crowd is massive. So you take the Western Financial Place and now triple it. And then you feed them. And that just blows our minds how many people were fed in this one instant. Jesus could have simply just prayed and blessed the food, and everybody's pockets were full of food. And they were like, hey, did you know I had some? I don't know. But no, he used the disciples to distribute the food. And that's the cool thing about the Lord. We often look and say, Lord, why do you even need me? Why don't you just do it? Why don't you just step in and make this thing happen? Because he wants to work with us. He wants our participation. He's like a father saying, hey, come on, let's work together side by side. He knows the disciples are fumbling and goofing up and making a mess. But he's like, I want to work with you guys. I want to see you guys grow. I want to work side by side. And he wants these guys to work with him. He deliberately used a way that would require the disciples to get in there and get working. Remember, they're tired. The disciples have been out doing ministry, and they've come back. They're tired too, and they're hungry. And the Lord says, okay, we still have work to do. And so they go out and they do the work. And so it says in verse 12, so when they were filled, he said to his disciples, gather up the fragments that remain so that nothing is lost. So beyond just the food that he's fed the 15,000, there's leftovers. There's leftovers. There's more left over. And that's how the Lord works. He doesn't just say, hey, I'm just going to give you enough to barely squeak by. No, he gives us enough that there's leftovers. He says, gather the fragments that remain so that nothing is lost. Let's not waste any. Let's gather it all up. And it's beautiful because it says here that they were filled. So when they were filled, and this word filled is speaking of Thanksgiving, Christmas filled. You know, when you're sitting there on the couch going, I can't do anymore. We all know that, right? That feeling where you're breathing because you're just like, oh, it's just, oh. And you in your mind, you visualize that the turkey's still sitting right here because it hasn't moved its way down yet. And then someone comes out with pie, and what do you say?
Yes, please.
Yes, please. Ice cream? Sure. And you're like, there's just no room, but I must. They were stuffed, they were filled, and yet there were still fragments left over. Therefore they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten. Jesus supplied the entire crowd, 15,000 people, more than enough food to be filled, and he left the leftovers for the disciples, enough for them to be filled and also have more to keep going. Huh?
It dawned on me, 12 baskets.
12 baskets.
12, it's like,
One for each of you guys. So you can imagine these guys are just like, wow, this is crazy. Wow. He's taking care of all of their needs and blessed them beyond. Now they have bread for the next day. They've got leftovers to take with them. And that's how the Lord works in our lives. And sometimes we think, oh, it's too big of a thing and the Lord can't come through. And then he does come through. And he comes through far beyond what we can imagine. Far beyond what we could ever think. And we've all heard stories of how the Lord has blessed and how he's worked in different people's lives. But when we look at our own life, we can say, yeah, I can see times where I thought this is impossible. And then 2 months later, I'm sitting there going, how did this happen? The Lord took care of everything. Opened all the doors, gave me the right job at the right time, took care of my family, took care of everything. But at the time, I thought, this is no way. All I got is 5 barley loaves and 2 fishes. No way this is going to happen. And the Lord steps in and does an amazing work. These guys started the day tired, worn out and hungry, and now they're sitting around with Jesus, and they got enough food to be filled and leftovers to boot. And they're excited. Verse 14, it says, Then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, This is truly the prophet who is to come into the world. They looked to Jesus as the prophet Moses prophesied. In Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 15, it says, The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your midst, from your brethren. Him you shall hear. Jesus is this prophet that has been raised up. And he is doing an amazing work. Moses, as the Israelites said, Moses was there when the bread came down from heaven. And now they're looking at Jesus and they have just gotten bread from heaven. They have been filled and they say, wow, man. They looked at him and said, this is truly the prophet who has come into the world. Here he is. He's here. And they're excited. And so what do? It says, therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he departed again to the mountain by himself alone. So instead of worship, they go, this is perfect. This solves our problems. We're going to take Jesus and we'll make him our king. Notice what it says. They're going to take him by force. They're not going to go up to him, hey, Jesus, we had this idea. You know, they're just looking at him saying, hey, this is our answer. We're going to use him to be set free from the Romans. And the plus side is he can keep us fed. You know, he's good at these miracles and stuff. They're not asking for spiritual truth, as we're going to see as we get further in. They're not looking to that. They're looking purely on the practical outward thing. This is what I want right now. This is what I desire right now. And they're just looking at that. They wanted Jesus to be the king over them. They were only interested in what they could get from Jesus. They saw Jesus as a way out. They saw him as a one who could do miracles and to feed their bellies. We can sometimes come to Jesus in the same way. When we have the mindset of, what can I get from Jesus? Or I'm really only happy with the Lord when he's taking care of me. But when struggle comes, now I'm mad at him. Because he's not taking care of my situation anymore. He's not giving me what I want. He's not giving me the bread I want. The Lord desires that we love him for who he is and not simply what we can get from him. That is the relationship that the Lord desires from us. That we love him for who he is and not what we can get from him. Does the Lord desire to bless you? Yes. Will he take care of you even through the storm? Yes. But do we just worship him for that? Or do we worship him for who he is? The Lord, the God of creation. the one who created us and loves us. And that sometimes we have to step back and check our motivations, check our heart every now and then. Say, Lord, why am I worshiping you only when I feel like I'm getting something from you? And then when I'm not, I'm kind of like, you know? Or am I worshiping you for who you are? Have you guys ever read a book or watched a documentary or whatever of someone who spent long time in prison, torture? You know, we hear the stories of World War II, those that suffered, and different stories like that. And we think, how did they survive locked in that prison cell all that time? Because honestly, sometimes we look at it and we go, how did they last that long? I would probably give up before that. I would probably be like, God, why have you left me here? No, they're worshiping the Lord. Paul and Silas, they're beaten in Philippi. They're whipped and thrown in prison. And at midnight, they're worshiping the Lord. They're having a worship session in the prison cell. I have to be honest. Sometimes I think I read that story and I go, Lord, I hope that if that happens, I would be in the same mindset. But sometimes I think I'd be like, why me? This is not fair. I want to speak to my lawyer. You know, I'd be grouching and complaining and whining, but they were worshiping the Lord. They were worshiping the Lord. And then prison cells open up, and what do? They stay. They stay in prison. And the Lord uses it to lead the prison guard, the warden, to the Lord. It's a super blessing. Sometimes we can just be caught in this attitude of, Lord, what can I get from you? And then when we're not getting from him, or we perceive that we're not getting what we want, we kind of just toss him aside. We have to check our motivation and check our heart. Lord, is that why I'm worshiping you? Because I expect things from you? And as we're going to see in this story, literally the next verse, the disciples are about to enter into a storm. They're about to enter into a difficult time. Jesus continues to teach these guys, continues to challenge their faith. And you know what? The Lord does that to us. He wants us to grow. And that's why when we're going through difficult times, when we're tired, we're worn out, and things keep going, we have to say, okay, Lord, what are you teaching me? What do you have? What are you showing me? How do you want me to learn and grow from this? And to seek the Lord on that, and just to hold on to him and trust him through it all. Verse 16, it says, Now when evening came, the disciples went down to the sea, got into the boat, and went over the sea towards Capernaum. And it was already dark, and Jesus had not come to them. So the other Gospels tell us that Jesus compelled them to go. Jesus says, okay, guys, it's time to go. As it said in the last verse, that Jesus went up into the mountain by himself. He's like, I'm going to go spend some alone time with my Father. You guys go. You go on ahead, cross the sea. I'll meet you on the other side. And so they head on into the sea, and Jesus did not come with them. Then the sea arose because a great wind was blowing. So the wind and the storm whips up. So when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and drawing near the boat, and they were afraid. So they have been rowing. They're halfway through. The wind is blowing. The waves are hitting them, and they see Jesus walking on the water. Now, the other gospel says he walked towards them as if he was going to overtake them, meaning walk right past them. Like as if, hey, all you need to do is see me, and that should be enough to get you to the other side. And he's walking upon the water. Okay? And it says, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and drawing near the boat, and they were afraid. And the other Gospels tell us that they thought he was a ghost or a spirit. They thought, what is this? Because they didn't expect to see Jesus just... The last storm that they went through with Jesus, Jesus was in the boat. Now Jesus is outside the boat walking on the water. And he's just do-do-do, and they're like, ah! You can just, personally, I think I would be a little freaked out. And Jesus said to them, it is I, do not be afraid. He calls out to them, says, hey, it's I, do not be afraid. Then they willingly received him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land where they were going. So Jesus slips away, tells his disciples to go on ahead. for he wanted to spend some time in prayer, and they head off across the sea. And the storm whips up, and Jesus is on the mountain, and he can see them in the boat. He's on the mountain praying, and he can see them in the boat struggling. That's a cool thing. Because even when we're in the storm, sometimes we feel like we've been abandoned. Like Jesus isn't there. Does he even see what's going on? Does he see our mess that we're in? But he is always watching. He is always there. Jesus told them, you guys go cross the sea. If Jesus tells you to go do something, that means you're going to get to the other side because he told you so. And we have to hold on to those promises. We have so many promises in the Word of God that say he's going to get us to the other side. So we need to hold on to that. Even when everything around us looks crazy. Now remember, most of these guys that are in that boat are seasoned fishermen. And when did they fish in those days? At night. That was the time they fished in the cool. In the coolness of the night, they would go out and fish, and that's when the fish, get caught in the nets. So they know how to cross the sea at night. They're used to the Sea of Galilee. They know its currents and all that stuff. And here we've got these guys who are seasoned, know what they're doing, and they're in a storm and they're struggling. They're struggling. And they're learning a lesson again in faith. Jesus came walking to them on the water, and they were afraid. They had just seen Jesus feed 5,000 plus people, bread and fish, and now they see him walking on the water, and they freak out. You think after all the things they've seen Jesus do so far, they shouldn't be surprised anymore. But let's be honest, we are that way, right? The Lord can do an amazing miracle first thing in the morning in our life. And by noon, we're already forgotten about it. And we're grumbling. And the Lord does something else, and we go, oh, whoa, where did that come from? Wow. And the Lord's like, I was here the whole time. I haven't left you. I'm taking care of you. I'm walking with you. He watched them as they struggled in the boat and worked. And like I said, this is the second time they've experienced a storm. The first time Jesus was in the boat and he was sleeping. And he calmed the sea. There's a false idea out there that if we are in the will of God, storms should not come upon our life. And it is so sad when people teach that or they imply it. If you're in the will of God, nothing bad will happen to you. That is simply not true. All we have to do is do what? Read the Bible. Do bad things happen? Yes. Does the Lord bring us through it? Absolutely. I love Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They stand up and say, hey, the Lord is true and we are going to follow him no matter what. Whether he takes us out of the fire or we perish in the fire, the Lord is with us. And that is the proper attitude. The Lord is going to take us and bring us through no matter what. He is there with us. And not to allow these things to overwhelm us. The other Gospels I said that Jesus compelled them to go across. That means that as they crossed the sea, they were in the will of God. And in the will of God, what happened? There was a storm. Yeah. There was a storm and they were protected because they're in the will of God. So even in our life, when we hit those storms that feel like they're overwhelming us and the waves are crashing upon us, we need to just call out to the Lord and say, Lord, I know that you are with me. I know that you will bring me through. Give me the faith and the strength I need to walk through this. Help me to walk through. And it's always good for us to look back to parts like this in the scripture and say, oh Lord, you took the disciples through. That boat could have sunk and they could have gone down. But the Lord took them through this time, through the storm. When Jesus came to them on the boat, Matthew's gospel tells us that Peter stepped out of the boat. Here the story gets even crazier. Jesus comes to the boat. They're freaked out. He says, hey, don't worry, it's me. And Peter does what? says, hey, can I get out of the boat? And Matthew, if you want to turn there, Matthew chapter 14, verse 28. Matthew 14.
I wonder if there was some competition between them because John accidentally forgot to tell that part.
Yeah, John. You'll notice this if you look at the different Gospels. You'll notice that there are some sections that John either doesn't mention or he specifically points out. Peter did this boneheaded thing. Just want to make sure you know that he did this. And Peter and John worked very closely together, so you got to wonder if there was a little bit of a, well, I'm just going to make sure I record this for everybody so that you know. Chapter 14, verse 28. Where are we here? And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. So he said, come. And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid and began to sink. He began to sink and cried out, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and said to him, you of little faith, why do you doubt? And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Then those who were in the boat came and worshipped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. The Lord was using this storm to teach his disciples about faith, to strengthen them. If God can feed the 5,000 and heal and set men free from demons, then why won't he meet you on the lake, in the sea, in the storm? Peter's mistake here is that he took his eyes off of Jesus. Notice what it says. It says he took his eyes off of him, but when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid. He was looking to Jesus. He said, Jesus, hi, can I come? And Jesus says, come. And he steps out and he begins to walk looking at Jesus. And then he starts doing this. Whoa, it's pretty crazy out here. And blah, blah, blah. He starts sinking down. And Jesus grabs him. And that's exactly what happens to us, right? We say, Lord, I trust you. Oh, trust. We get up in the morning, Lord, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust you. Oh, yes, Lord. And then we pick up our bill and start looking it over again. No, that's impossible. There's no way. It can't be paid. Lord, I trust you so much. I trust you. But this is not going to happen. I know I always say it. We lay our stuff at the foot of the cross and then pick it up as soon as we're done. Right? We're just like, okay, Lord, I lay it before your feet. I know you're going to take care of it. But just in case you forget, I need to take these with me. And we walk them off, and the Lord just shakes his head and goes, no, leave them. Let me take care of them. Let me take care of this. And Peter here, he took his eyes off of Jesus and he began to sink. Like Philip and Andrew, he began to crunch the numbers. He began to look at the situation. Well, that's impossible. You know, we don't have enough money. We can't get enough bread. We only have 5 loaves, 2 fish. This is impossible. It can't happen. Peter looked around and went, this is not possible. I can't walk on the water. I'm a fisherman. I've tried. It doesn't work. And he begins to sink and go in the water. And immediately when Jesus saw him, he reached out and he grabbed him and he saved him. And immediately when Jesus got in the boat, the storm stopped, and the gospel here tells us the storm stopped, and immediately they were on the other side. They were in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. Jesus gets in the boat, and they are immediately on the other side. So here we have one of those instances where the Lord literally raptured them to the other side of the lake. They were there. You can imagine the disciples like, here they're rowing, and they're like, hey, I'm hitting the dock. What's going on? The storm stopped, and immediately on the other side. Verse 22, it says, on the following day, when the people who were standing on the other side of the sea saw that there was no other boat there except that one which his disciples had entered, and that Jesus had not entered the boat with his disciples, but his disciples had gone away alone. However, other boats came from Tiberias near the place where they ate bread after the Lord had given thanks. When the people therefore saw that Jesus was not there, nor his disciples. They also got into boats and came to Capernaum seeking Jesus. So they get up in the morning and they go, wait a second, there's no other boats here. The disciples left in a boat. Jesus isn't here anymore, but there's no boat that took him. What's going on? So they jump in because they're looking for Jesus. So they jump in the boat and they head for Capernaum. And what do? They find Jesus on the other side. And when they found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, Rabbi, when did you come here? Well, how did you get here? We didn't see the boat leave. Did you swim? How did you get here? Jesus answered them and said, and I love this. We've seen this already with Jesus. Jesus cuts straight to the point. They ask him one question, and he answers them something completely different. Most assuredly I say to you, you seek me not because you saw the signs, but because you ate of the loaves and were filled. Do not labor for the food which perishes, but for the food which endures to everlasting life, which the Son of Man will give you, because God the Father has set his seal on him. Jesus cuts right to the core. What do you guys really need to know? I'm going to tell you what you really need to know. You guys are coming to me because you want more food. That's what you're coming for. You're only interested in filling your bellies. And he says, do not labor for food which perishes, but for the food which endures to everlasting life. We have an issue at home where bread tends to be left and then found. And we have a bread box, and you reach into the bread box and you pull out the bag and you go, this bread wasn't green when we bought it. But it's really green now. I think we'll just put that, it's like, who's creating penicillin here? Like, what are we doing here? Do not labor for the food which perishes, but for the food which endures to everlasting life, which the Son of Man will give you, because God the Father has set his seal on him. We spend a lot of time toiling for food which perishes. Our world teaches us that we only go around once in this life, so we need to grab all we can and hold on to it. Grab as much as you can and hold on to it. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 19, Jesus says, do not lay up for yourself treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The people here were looking for food that would feed their belly. They were looking for the practical. They were looking for the physical, what they need right now. And Jesus is looking beyond that, just like he did with Nicodemus, just like he did with the woman at the well. He goes beyond what they're asking and just says, I need to tell you the truth. You need the food that brings you everlasting life. Then they said to him in verse 28, what shall we do that we may work the works of God? So they do what a lot of us do. Okay, well, what do we need to do? What's the work that we need to do? Is it the hat I wear? Is it the cloak I wear? Is it what kind of food do I eat? Should I wash my hands 3 times a day? What's the work that I need to do? And they got that mindset from the Pharisees because they taught all these traditions and they had all these practices and all these weird things. I grew up in a family where my mom's side of the family was all Catholic, and there was a lot of the whole... And I remember my uncle sitting and having family dinner, and I have never seen someone pray so fast. My dad was a very slow prayer. This is what dinner was like at our place. And we would start going, are we starting now? And he'd just be sitting there. Just pray. My uncle, on the other hand, this is what it looked like. We're going to pray. Okay. Okay, eat. And I'd be like, you open your eyes, you're like, did something just happen? I saw hands flicking around, and I heard something really quick, and it was just like, boom. It's done. It's over. It's done. It's fast. These guys were looking for works. What do I do? What's the thing I do? What's the work that I can do? And Jesus says here, therefore they said to him, what sign will you perform then, that we may see it and believe you? What work will you do? So then first they ask, this is the work, sorry, I skipped a verse there, sorry. Yeah, making sense here. They said to him, what shall we do that we may work the works of God? And Jesus answered and said to them, this is the work of God, that you believe in him who sent me. Believe in him who he sent. He's saying, believe in me. This is what you need to do. It's not a work. It's not a tradition. It's not a going through the motion. Just simply believe in me, Jesus says to them. Just believe in me. And they respond, therefore they said to him, what sign will you perform then, that we may see it and believe you? What work will you do? I can see Jesus going. And the disciples, I kind of imagine disciples, they still got their baskets and they're like, okay, this is what you're here for, right? Came for the bread, don't you remember? Yesterday, the bread and the healing and all that stuff that took place. But no, see, they just want more. They just want more of the same. They just want a sign. They're only interested in what they can get from Jesus. Now, verse 31 here we see that they begin to manipulate, thinking they can manipulate Jesus. Our fathers ate manna in the desert, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. So they say, what sign is it that you're going to do for us? Oh, by the way, our fathers ate the manna in the desert, as written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. Wink, wink. More bread would be nice. Maybe some bacon and eggs while we're at it. Oh, I guess bacon wouldn't be kosher.
Turkey bacon.
Turkey bacon. So it's like, hey, we would like some more bread, please. That's what they're asking. They're like, well, Moses. Remember, they said this is the prophet that Moses spoke about. They're connecting Jesus with the bread. Now they're trying to manipulate, saying, we would like some more bread, please, because Moses gave them bread every day in the wilderness. That's their mindset, right? And so they're saying, hey, Moses gave our fathers bread, so you give us bread. Then Jesus said to them, most surely I say to you, Moses did not give you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. Moses didn't give them the bread. God did. Jesus says right out, Moses didn't give you the bread, God gave you the bread. You're putting the wrong emphasis on the wrong thing. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. He's trying to get their mind off, just like with Nicodemus, just like with the Samaritan woman at the well, off the practical. Remember the woman at the well, she says, give me some of that water. He's like, that's not what, I'm talking about spiritual things. He's trying to get their mind off of that and onto the spiritual things. From the bread that satisfies for a short time to the bread that gives eternal life. In verse 34, we see their response. They said to him, Lord, give us this bread always. Notice this is the same response that the woman of the well said. She said, well, then give me that so I don't have to come back and get water from the well anymore. They're still thinking, give me that loaf of bread that continually feeds me. That's what I want. It's the everlasting gobstopper from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, You take the candy and it never ends, right? But they're looking for the loaf of bread, the everlasting loaf of bread. They were physically hungry and they thought that all they needed was bread, but they could not look deeper to the spiritual problem, which can only be cured by believing in the bread of life that brings true life, eternal life. And Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. Jesus tries to lift their eyes from their bellies to look at him beyond their physical desire and to the Lord. He's trying to get them to look and realize that thing that they're hungering, that thing that they're thirsting for, it's me. It's me. Come and partake. There is a spiritual hunger in all men, a need to worship something. And that is why when we look around the world, we see false religions galore. We see spirituality. We see new age weird stuff. We see people, talking to crystals and doing all kinds of weird things because people have this desire, this need to worship. But because of the darkness of their hearts, they reject God and they look at everything else but God. They're running. They have this hunger and they're trying to fill it with everything else, with drugs, with alcohol, with everything they can find. They're trying to fill it, but they can't fill it. They're always left hungry, desiring more. Just leaves them hungry and they're right back where they started. But when we place our trust in Jesus, he fills that hunger and that thirst. He fills us with that fresh living water that quenches, that satisfies. I think it's interesting here because he says to the woman at the well, I am the living water. Notice what he says here about himself. He says, I am the bread of life. Who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. Does bread quench your thirst? No. He's speaking of this spiritual bread because he says, I am the living water. I am the bread. And he has come to fill and to give them everything they need. But I say to you that you have seen me and you do not believe. They've seen Jesus perform these miracles. They've seen him do amazing things, but yet they will not believe. They're too blinded by the physical and the outside. All that the Father gives me, all the Father gives me will come to me, and the one who comes to me I will by no means cast out. The Lord begins a work in a man's heart to draw them to him. Verse 38 says, For I have come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. This is the will of the Father who sent me, that of all he has given me I should lose nothing, but should raise it up at the last day. And this is the will of him who sent me, that everyone who sees the Son and believes in him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at the last day. The Father has given all into Jesus' hand. He's given everyone into Jesus' hand. That everyone who sees the Son and believes in him may have everlasting life. So who can have everlasting life? Anyone. Anyone who believes in Jesus, places their trust in Jesus. And at the end, we will be raised from the dead. It's beautiful and it's exciting. The Lord has opened the door for each and every one. And the thing that's cool about it, it says that the Father here is drawing people. The Father is calling people to him. That means when we're sharing with others, when we're sharing with friends and family, we can realize the Lord is doing the work. We just have to be the participants, like the disciples. We just have to take the basket of bread, take the gospel, hand it out, and let the Lord do the work. Let the Lord reach their heart. And just trust and pray that the Lord would break through. And we bring that bread and we faithfully, like we talked about on Sunday, we do our best. And the Lord does the rest. We just come faithfully before him and say, Lord, this is what I've got and I'm going to give it to you. And we come. That's as far as we're going to get tonight. Because there's so much more in this chapter. And I didn't want to rush through it. But the Lord has so much for us. And all we have to do is grab onto that bread and eat of it. And I think the big thing in this is that we trust the Lord no matter what we're going through, whether it's a storm, whether it's a good time or a bad time. And we allow the Lord to build our faith and strengthen us. And not allow the storms to knock us off kilter. And that we trust in him. And that we check our motivation. Have I just been, in the last few weeks or whatever, have I just been serving you and coming to you because of what I want to get from you? One of the biggest problems with the name it and claim it, blab it and grab it, the prosperity movement, is that people are taught that they can get from God. They can demand from God with their words. They can command God to do stuff and they can get God. They take the blessing of God and they twist it into something that they can control. Instead of something that our loving Father wants to do for us, they believe it's something they can control and I can get whatever I want. Whatever's my will. And what does it say? His will be done, not mine. They think, oh, I can get whatever I want. The problem is what do we see in our world? Does it work that way? No. Do we see that in the scriptures? No. Do you think that Moses had faith? Do you think that Elijah had faith? Do you think that Paul had faith? How long did Paul spend in prison? Years of his life, chained up, hungry and cold. But the Lord brought him through and used him mightily. When we get this attitude like, well, if I serve you, then you need to bless me and do all these great things, we're not trusting in the Lord of the Bible. We're trusting in Santa Claus. And that's why we have to be careful. Are we looking at God like he's Santa Claus? Like he's the genie that we rub and get our 3 wishes? Or is he God the Father, the creator of the heaven and the earth, who loved me so much that he sent his only son to die for me that I could be set free and be one of his children? And I'm so blessed to be in his family. What an awesome blessing. All right, let's pray. God, we thank you so much for your word. We thank you for your truth. May we continue to grow in you and learn and be built up. Lord, that your spirit would be speaking to our hearts, that we would be strengthening you each day. We thank you in Jesus' precious name. Amen. Amen.